it's better to try than to talk about. I had so many great ideas over the years that I never bothered to realize that could have been great ahead of their time and so on. Who didn't think of the iPhone or this or that? Yes, everybody had, similar things in their mind where they said, oh yeah, this could be great.
Mm.
The difference is always in the execution. So there has to be a bias for action. Do it earlier. It doesn't have to be perfect, but do it.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as a CEO and founder of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com and grab some time to strategize with us. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, Markellos, and I'm going to slaughter your last name, so I'm not going Diorinos. Diorinos?
That's very good.
All right, that's as close as I'm gonna get. So Markellos,
You're close to perfection, Devin.
All right. So Markellos has been an entrepreneur, I guess, for at least the last 3 years, or really dived into it. But started out really before that as an entrepreneur in the software, right out of business. Loved it, but there were things that he figured out that he didn't know, or lots of things that he had yet to learn, and so went out to get a bit of experience with bigger businesses. Started in software development with some smaller businesses. Kind of got that, worked for Microsoft for a period of time. Got the software development side of it, and then shifted over to marketing. Did marketing, which helped to kind of combine the marketing side as well as technical skills. And then he started to look for ability to go out, branch out, do his own thing after hitting his ceiling, and started the company he's at now with his co-founder. So with that much as an introduction, I'm sure Markellos will tell us all the additional details. Welcome onto the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Devin. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, your pronunciation is great. Remember that I do come from Greece, and my name usually gets a much worse treatment from my compatriots. So kudos to you. You did very, very well.
Well, fair enough. Well, I'll take that as a compliment, because that's most of the time I slaughter names just like the next person. So now with that, let's dive into a little bit of your journey. Tell us a little bit about kind of coming out with college, kind of having the entrepreneurial bent, but also wanting to kind of go out and increase your skill sets. Kind of start us off on your journey.
Thank you. And I love talk about my journey. There are so many things that shape us. And, when you look back into your journey of a lifetime, pretty much, I'm not very young anymore. It's interesting to see all those the twists and turns that made you who you are today. So yes, I did graduate from computer science, and my major back in the day was in computer graphics, and my actual master's was in virtual reality, and that was way back in 1996 when I was doing virtual reality on a computer that was probably the size of a very small fridge. It wasn't an iPhone back in the day, and I remember that we had to get the university to order some extra texture memory, another 32 megabytes. And that was so expensive to get another 32 megabytes. It's crazy stuff when you consider that now you have, I don't know, gigabytes, I guess, in your phone. Exactly. So I did start as a computer engineer because I loved computers. And this was one of my very early learnings that it took me very long to realize though what it was. I love coding, and I'm a great coder. I think that coding is a form of art. And you put your best out there, and really sometimes with my ex-colleagues, when I look at their code, you can immediately tell who wrote that code because it is that personal. But there is always a confusion between skills and professions, right? Being a good coder, being a great coder actually doesn't make me a great developer, because there's this difference. To be a coder, you need to be this spirit, look at the big picture, be quick on your feet, think about, like to integrate, like to analyze, like to do all those things. To be a great developer, though, it requires that you are a rule follower, because you can't go and do your own thing all the time, right? You have to follow the rules set by others if you want to work in tandem with other people. You have to be more serious than enthusiastic, because most projects, as you may have noticed, take several years to finish. And I was the kind of guy who would love the challenge, who would go do the hardest parts first, and then I would hate everything else. So I spent about 10 years of my career trying to figure out why I didn't love coding. I'd change from company to company and do a bit coding here, software architecture there, and so on.
So, and give us a
Real-
little bit of an idea. So, I mean, 10 years is a good jump. So, where did you, because I think when we talked before, but get me, you can correct me where I'm wrong, that you kind of wanted to be an entrepreneur and you did that for a bit of time out of college and then decided you had to go get wanted to get additional business skills you didn't have. Is that right? Or kind of what
That's
was
that's
that
also
transition out of college?
that's also true. I worked a bit after college, and I did my own firm, which was
Mm,
great.
mm,
I was doing some of the coding. I was dreading some of it, and I
mm,
was loving some of the business parts.
mm,
And as I was moving ahead, and I saw that I was sometimes knocking my head against the wall because there were so many things that I just didn't know how to manage, and trying to wear all these hats without having the experience, it didn't work.
mm,
And remember that as a single entrepreneur, actually, we're two partners. It was so hard. You had to do pretty much everything. And that's when I said that that's fine, but let's see if I can get more experience by becoming a manager in coding. And this is where
mm,
I start my journey to say, let's learn about this. And I went and started working for companies. And, I coded a bit, I managed a bit of coding and things like that. None of it really fulfilled me as much as I wanted. And that's when I started reinforcing that and said, yeah, it looks like business is my thing, right?
mm,
And sometimes when you are in this technology world, you see people who are great at technology, you see people who are great at business. You
mm,
rarely see people who have a firm grasp of both. So
mm,
I didn't have a firm grasp of both. I was really good at technology. So I said, let's go and get some better education in terms of business. So, at the time I joined Microsoft, I worked with Microsoft for a number of years, different roles, originally as a coder, later as a product manager.
mm,
And that also gave me the opportunity, and I'm always thankful to Microsoft for that, for sponsoring my MBA. So I
mm.
got the opportunity to do my MBA at the UW. And I always like to say that MBAs are for lazy people like me, because they give you no knowledge that you couldn't get otherwise, right? Everything is in the
Mm,
books, and you even get the syllabus.
mm,
Sitting down to learn things like HR, accounting, I would never ever do it on my own volition. I'd
mm,
hate it. But it was a required asset. It's
mm.
it's required that you understand accounting if you want to move ahead in business. You have to understand HR. You have to know about affirmative action. You have to think about strategy. All these things. This is what you get in an MBA.
Mm. So now you're doing Microsoft. You've both taken the opportunity to get some skills there, see a bit more of the business side, work or make or get some of the things that you maybe didn't learn initially in college, especially as you go into software and engineering. They don't ever teach the business side. They teach you how to do the programming, they teach you how to do some of the other stuff, but business is really not taught. And I would say that's a bit of an issue or fallacy with most business or most degrees, in the sense, even unless you do go get the business degree and MBA, and even that I don't know that you always get the skills. But you go get the MBA, you get a bit of the big business skills, you learn how they do it, and then you make a transition. I think you said over to marketing. Is that right? So as you're doing that, you
That's
decide,
right.
hey, I want to look or work in a bit of marketing. So maybe fill us in. How was the transition from going more from the engineering side to the marketing side? What skills did you pick up, and how did that help prepare you going forward?
Um, it's always a tough change
Mm,
because it requires a shift in the way you're thinking. And interestingly enough, once you go to school, what they taught me in computer science school, and I
mm,
studied in Germany, but I think it's pretty much the same everywhere.
mm,
At the university, they don't teach you how to code. I mean,
mm,
I think we had one class in coding, and that was even elective. They teach you how to think, and that's
mm,
the thing that you take away. Interestingly enough, once you go to business school, they also teach you how to think, but think differently, right? The
mm,
business thinking and the engineering thinking are different ways of looking at sometimes even the same problems.
mm,
So I got the MBA, and that gave me the opportunity to move, internally within Microsoft. And there I was as one of my first roles, being the security product manager for Internet Explorer. That was back in the day when we were releasing Internet Explorer 7. And
mm,
I don't know if you remember, but Internet Explorer 7 didn't have wasn't known for being robust in its security features. So
Mm,
how do you start from zero, and how do you start building up and saying, hey, no, we got our act together now. We've gotten things that work, and we really care about customers after you
mm,
haven't done something for the most part of, I think it was 5 or 6 years back in the day.
mm,
It was an interesting challenge. And it's also amazing. And this is one of the things that I love when I worked at Microsoft, that you got an audience of like 3 billion users. I got from,
mm,
having 5 customers or coding for a team of 50 to now having 3 billion potential customers that I was talking to. And that's awesome. This is, the muscle that some of those big companies bring.
mm,
It's amazing. And you learn how to deal with that scale and how you can still influence things, whether the scale is tiny or whether the scale is huge, as
mm,
is in the case of Microsoft. So I did some of that, and I was loving some of it. I was hating being part of a large company. And I
mm,
think Microsoft at the time was a pretty decent one,
mm,
but it was as large a company as a large company can be.
mm.
And as you lay your plans, things happen that you don't expect, like getting married. And then all of a sudden your wife says, hey, I don't really love it here. Let's go move someplace else. And it's
Mm,
important to keep priorities in life. So what is it that actually makes you happy? It's not just
mm,
the work or Microsoft or tech. It
mm,
has to be a mix of everything. So if you keep your eye on the mix, you're always going to end up being happy and content. If you lose sight of it,
mm,
you'll just end up erring on either side, right? You can put too much on your personal life, too much in your professional life. You can always get it wrong. So
mm.
that's how I ended up back in Greece, in Athens,
So
where I started.
now one question. So when your wife says, "Hey, I don't want to live here anymore. Let's go do something else," you moved to Greece. Did you leave Microsoft at that time? Did you have a plan to keep working for them? Did you say, "Hey, here's my opportunity to go be my own entrepreneur, do start my own thing"? But so, how did you kind of make that transition to saying, "Okay, we're going to move. We're going to go do something different"?
Interestingly enough, Microsoft said, hey, why don't you stick with us for a while? And I was like, no, 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 I'm going to be too far away. My wife actually stayed for Microsoft for almost another 10 years after that. And she was working remotely for most part. So you see that you can have different solutions to the same problems. But at the time, I was feeling that being part of something so big was wearing me down. So I wanted to try something smaller. And
Mm,
that gave me the opportunity to go. And I joined I think that at the time it was a startup. When I left, it was like a 400-person company.
mm,
A startup in mobile marketing, which
mm,
is a completely different arena again, but where your final audience is again huge, where you're running campaigns for 100 million users, for 300 million users in Brazil, for 100 million people in Indonesia. It's pretty cool stuff.
mm. So,
So, and go
mm.
ahead.
No. So I was just gonna say, so you decided, hey, I they offered, I'm going to decide, here's where I make my break. I'm gonna do there's a lot of cool stuff going on. I'm gonna do something different. So how did you then make the transition to starting your own business or figuring out what you're gonna do or what are you gonna do next as you're moving and as you're getting things set up?
I spent at this startup I was, well, company by that time, I
Mm,
spent almost 10 years, 11 years, which is a very, very long time for me.
mm,
But if you're in a small company that's evolving with you, then it's actually fun. So I started doing one thing, and I think over the 10 next years, I probably were doing 5 or 6 different things. Every other year, something
mm,
would happen, things would change. There would be new challenges, new markets, and that kept me interesting until after some point, I reached a stage where I wasn't getting much new, not being challenged. And this is one of the main things about what I believe is successful entrepreneurs. They like challenges. They like to solve problems.
mm,
And when I see myself successful is I go somewhere, I find a problem, I solve it, and I set it up so that it doesn't require me anymore to run.
mm,
So, I set this all up. I kind of exhausted the areas where I could be, and I reached my ceiling, so to
mm,
say, within that organization.
mm,
And that brought me to say, I really need to find what's next. And
mm,
that, goes full circle back to my early issues. Why I couldn't, from a great programmer, become a great developer. And then looking at all those years working with people, all the hires I've made. And I had the opportunity to hire people literally across the world. I hired people in the US, in Canada, in South America, Brazil, Argentina, all the way to Africa and Vietnam. So once you do that and you try to hire in these places, you realize that your usual hiring process, the things that you anchor upon when you
Mm,
look at candidates and resumes, they don't work. What I learned for Europeans and Americans didn't work in Brazil, didn't work in Africa, and definitely did not work in Vietnam. So after many bad interviews, unfortunately, with people who came to me and I said, this is a waste of time for me. It's a
mm,
waste of time for the candidate. This person should have never been here. Why can't I find the right people? And I was talking with HR a lot, and they were saying, here's a stack of resumes. Take your pick. And you realize quickly that you can't always find truth in resumes. There are
mm,
so many things that are important, and a resume can, to an extent, assuming that it's truthful, tell me if you have the skills, but can it tell me if you have the personality for the role? If you look
mm,
at my resume, or if you actually measure my skill in coding, you think this person is awesome, pretty soon you're going to say that I'm a lousy developer if
mm,
you were hiring me for that. So that was kind of the impulse to go and say, hey, let's figure out a better solution. And the impulse, it's so much better when it's shared. So this
mm,
is where my co-founders come in. I think there's nothing more valuable in any startup than people, and it starts with the co-founders. These were the people who looked at the same problem and said, yeah, and they brought different perspectives to the same problem.
mm,
Actually, one of our co-founders, he's a psychologist by training, and he said, no, there are methods for this. We should see what science says and do that. I was saying, okay, let's figure out how we could sell this and why there is a niche in the market for this. And there was our third co-founder who's technical and who said, easy peasy, I'll get this coded in what ended up being 3 years, but he said like in a week at the time.
mm. So when you guys you kind of identified, okay, you're working in a business at the time. At the same time, man, it's just hard to get good employees, good people that are going to fit the bill and do the work and do it how you want. And so you have kind of the kernel of the idea that, hey, maybe we should go do the startup, do our own business. It's for hiring and how to find the right employees, how to do that assessment, how to make the matches. Did you jump all in? Did you guys, you and your co-founders and that, leave your jobs and start in it? Did it start as a side hustle? Is it still a side hustle? Or kind of how did you get to where you're at?
Having three co-founders helps. So for one of us, it was a side hustle.
Mm,
One of our co-founders said, hey, I love this. Here are ideas. I'll even give you some money. You guys go do it.
mm,
For the other two of us, it became a main enterprise. And I think it's so much harder to do things as a side hustle.
mm,
Every so often you're gonna find one startup that came up about this super fantastic idea, which just took off by itself. However, 95% of the time, startups are successful because of great execution. And
mm,
we have an idea. The idea has been implemented several times in the market. It wasn't something unknown. We took the idea, we evolved it, and sometimes, when you have this confluence of things, the time is just right. You have enough technology, people are at the right cognitive place in terms of thinking about these things.
mm,
Everything just aligns. And then with all these things, we said, okay, let's go and do it. We still need to execute perfectly. Any success that we've had so far wasn't just because we had a fantastic idea,
mm.
is because we have an awesome execution. And here's one thing that I'm always going to emphasize. I keep saying it probably in every other meeting if you ask our team. Excellence doesn't require perfection. Being excellent, doing something awesome and world changing doesn't mean that you're doing something perfect.
Mm. No, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. Now, one question that I had as you were chatting, so because you said that two of you kind of were all in, you were doing, you went in. This was your full time endeavor, and really weren't doing it as a side hustle. You also said that it took 2 or 3 years to really get through the programming, get it all built up and running. So, how were you guys? Did you or supporting yourself during that time? Did you have some clients? Did you have savings? Did you have investment dollars, or kind of how did you support yourselves, or as you got the business up and going?
You know how startups are, they live milestone to milestone. So we started with a very small fund to develop a first proof of concept to say that, it could happen.
Mm,
Then we showed this and we started getting some angel money. And with that angel money, we were able to hire a team of psychologists, because the most important thing in what we're doing was to have solid science behind it. We got that leaked. Once you have that milestone, you can get the next round of angel money and say, okay, now I'm going to do my MVP. And then
Mm,
you go and you start getting some money. Once we had the MVP running enough that it looks like a viable business, we were able to get the first institutional investors. And here, this is where we are today, where we had the round of funding from an institutional investor. Big Pie, one of the VC firms based out of Europe, has
mm,
actually been great in supporting us in moving forward with our vision.
mm. So now with that, so you got some investment, you're able to keep the lights on, have a paycheck for a period of time as you're now hitting your milestones, you're getting things up and running. Now, when you finally got the product programmed out, you got it launched, and you got things going. How has that gone? Do you have customers and clients? Is it still a slow build? Has it been a quick build? Is it still one where too early to tell, or kind of how has that gone?
That's a good question. What is a slow build? So, what is the benchmark against which every entrepreneur has to measure themselves? And that's a very open-ended question, right? So
Mm,
I think in our first year, we went from literally zero to a quarter of a million in ARR, which we
mm,
think is a decent performance.
mm,
We think we could have done better.
mm,
During that year, we made a lot of mistakes. And remember, we're an experienced team. We're not even the first timers here. All
mm,
of us who've been involved have had experience in one way or another. This is not a 25-year-old startup. We still made mistakes. It's a new arena, it's a new game, it's a new place, and we learned, and we got to where we are now. We have every year we want to do at least a 5x.
mm.
We think that's a great goal, and we'll keep on pursuing that.
No, I that's a great goal, and it's great that you're starting. Because some businesses you spend 2 or 3 years getting the product up and going, starting or figuring it all out, getting it all built out, and then you launch it and you don't have any sales, or you have such dismal sales that it really doesn't go anywhere, and then it's a bit demoralizing, or you don't have, hey, how do now you have to figure out how you're going to pivot, how you're going to adjust. So it sounds like on you guys' end, you were able to within a get the product launched. You spent a bit of time, thought it was going to take a couple of weeks to program, took a little bit longer, but once you got it launched, there was demand and there was people wanting to buy it. So now you take and then you hit on the next you're planning on continuing to grow it, continuing to double, 5x it, 10x it, and continue to expand it. So now, with that in mind, why don't we, I always have the two questions I ask at the end of the podcast. Why don't we jump to those? 'Cause I think it's a fitting transition, which is along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
Look, the most important thing in our company, any company, I think it's people. We were
Mm,
setting OKRs last week, and our first OKR is to build a great team.
mm,
In the way of building a great team, we are all people and we're all sentimental. We have a tool that luckily helps us hire people
mm,
by checking not only for skills and personality, but also for culture add. And by culture add, I mean that it's easy to understand. An accountant that works for one of the big fives, is it now big fours? How many are left? Consultancies is not the same type of, say, accountant that would work for a startup like Brick. Once
mm,
you realize that, you understand that you need to look for more than just skills and is this person a good accountant? There are accountants who are going to thrive in a startup environment
mm,
and accountants who are going to wither in the same environment. So this was our one mistake. We hired an excellent person. We didn't have the culture add feature at the time.
mm,
And that person was excellent, but not for us. They
mm,
can't survive in this environment. And it's an injustice to both parties when you keep someone who's not performing optimally. And by optimally, it doesn't mean that everybody has to be a rock star. Optimally means that someone who's at least good. And that's
mm,
the difference, right? Everybody goes out there and looks for people who are the 2%. We don't hire the 2%. We assess everybody, and we don't even hire necessarily the brightest of all. We hire the people who give us the most balanced package in terms of, can they do the job? Do they have the skills required for the specific job? That's one. Do they
mm,
have the personality required for the specific job? And do they fit into our culture? And
No,
sometimes, you'll give a bit of one to get the other. Someone who's going to be a lower cultural fit and be a better personality fit or whatever. But you always buy the whole package.
no, and I love that an idea because I think that sometimes you're gravitated to, oh, who has the best resume from skill sets, or who has a the most stellar background, that, oh, this is just going to be the perfect person. And yet if you're negating, you're not overlooking on fit, you can have the best person, but if they don't fit with the culture. And I'll give you an example that even in my end, we do Miller IP Law. We focus on a lot of startups and small businesses. I'm always to look to change a bit of the legal profession, how things are done, why are they done, and I'm always questioning. And so just because you're a good attorney doesn't mean you're going to fit well with the law firm, or with my law firm, because we're not going to be the typical law firm. So if you're just saying, hey, I just want to go in, be an attorney, do this way that it's been done for 100 years, and get in and get out, even if you have the great skills, you're not going to be the right fit for us. And so I think that too often, to your point, people are looking just for the skills when fit has every bit as much or more of an impact on whether or not they're a good candidate. So I think that's a mistake an easy mistake to learn, and certainly one to learn from.
You're
So
so right. And one additional thing that I like to emphasize is that
mm,
a lot of times people go looking for fit, and that, when tried to an extreme, can lead to monocultures. What we're
mm,
trying to think is, can we have someone who's going to add to our culture? So we
mm,
are who we are, and this is who we would like to be. And it's interesting. We have a benchmarking exercise in our software where you define your culture, and then it
mm,
measures everybody and tells you how you're doing.
mm,
We're not who we would like to be. And that's fine. No one is who would like to be. We always aspire to be better. But it's great when you can say, hey, I'm not going to hire Devin because
mm,
he brings all the other things, but he's going to bring this element of, I don't know, inventiveness that
mm,
the rest of the team are lacking. He's going to bring resilience. He's going to bring customer focus. Whatever it is that I care about, I
mm,
can now supplement to my team. And this is how you create a great team.
mm. No, and I think that's very insightful and very true. Well, now as we go to the second question, which is, if you're talking to someone that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Mm. Well, I gave one piece of advice, which was excellence doesn't require perfection. I'm always
Mm,
going to stand by that.
mm,
And, I was explaining my whole journey, and I said how I started and I went and got more and more and more knowledge because I wanted to avoid mistakes. And,
mm,
I needed to know more. And I think I confessed earlier that I said, hey, we had our first year. It was awesome. We did so many mistakes,
mm,
despite all our experience. So even though experience teaches you how to do things,
mm,
action is what makes the difference. So if I had one word of advice, it's better to try than to talk about. I had so
mm,
many great ideas over the years that I never bothered to realize that
mm,
could have been great ahead of their time and so on. Who didn't think of the iPhone or this or that? Yes, everybody had, similar things in their mind where they said, oh, yeah, this could be great.
mm,
The difference is always in the execution. So there has to be a bias for action. Do it earlier. It doesn't have to be perfect, but do it.
mm.
So I think if I say just do it, it's copyrighted already, but you get the meaning.
Fair enough. I doubt Nike will probably get mad at you if you just say just do it over the podcast. So you should be good. No, but I think that there's, that's interesting is, done now. I think we've done over 150 episodes on the podcast. And I'd say probably, and I'd have to go back to actually double check, the biggest thing on most entrepreneurs are saying is just dive in or do it earlier. Don't hold off, don't wait. Too many people will wait for years or months or years, and once they finally get in, dive in, and they do it, they find out they love it, they enjoy it, and it's the best decision. They wish they'd done it earlier, or they never get going, and then you always have that regret. So I think just diving in, doing it, getting going is probably the best. There's a lot of wisdom there. Well, as we wrap up, as people are wanting to learn more, they're wanting to use your product, they're wanting to be an employee, they're wanting to be an investor, they're wanting to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to find out more or connect up with you?
This is 2020, so the easiest way is to go up on our website, brick.com, and it sounds like a brick, but we spell it
Mm,
bryq.com, or you can email me, Markellos with two L's, Markellos at brick.com. I'm
mm,
always happy to hear. And we want to support startups. We even have special, very, very reasonable, almost ridiculously priced packages for startups,
Mm,
because it's the most important thing that we can give to startups. And we love it when we give these packages to startups, they grow into awesome teams, and then we keep upselling them as they grow bigger and bigger into unicorns.
mm,
So yes, if you have a startup and you're wondering, man, I cannot deal with this, I'll hire whomever, I'll hire referrals. Referrals are great if you know what you're getting, not because just someone referred them.
mm,
Everybody has to be treated equally. If you care about diversity and inclusion, do stop by brick.com and have a look. Free trials, great packages. Don't do the disservice of leaving hiring to randomness.
mm. No, I
And
think
that's the
that.
best thing that you can do for your company. That's another advice. Man, I should have changed my advice. Can I go back?
Hey, lots of good advice, and I think that's all very worthwhile. And I encourage everybody to check out Brick. Definitely a great new way to figure out how to hire and to get that right match, and to make sure you're bringing on the talent that you want. Well, Markellos, it's been fun to have you on. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners and you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, feel free to apply to be on the podcast by just going to inventiveguest.com. If you are a listener, also make sure to one, click subscribe so you get notifications as all the new awesome episodes come out, and two, leave us a review so that everybody else can find out about the podcast as well. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents or trademarks, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com, schedule some time with us to chat, and we'll strategize with you about protecting and growing your business. So thank you again, Markellos. It's been it's been a pleasure, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you very much for having me on, Devin. And IP is one of our most valuable assets. We always care about it. So it's interesting to be talking with an IP lawyer every time.
All right. Well, thank you again.